Glember, The Tale of a Monster. Written, recorded, and illustrated by A.K. Brookman. Chapter 19, Dragonback and the Eterlions, continued. Day 55. "Don't ever risk your life for women or mead," my uncle would often mourn. He'd then take another long draw from his flagon and say, "You leave that to me." I smiled in spite of my predicament, remembering that. I used to think him so foolish, now I wondered if he was not right. How much had I lived, that I now risked it all? Was it enough to risk it all for something more enduring, for moral principle? Women and mead, women and mead. I could go for a round of each right now, perhaps two. Rounds, that is. Yet I was never one to spend too much on either. I wanted to be a good man, the kind of man my mother and father would be proud of. That I had the prettiest girl in Meristheria was either testament to this, or sheer luck. I'd not question either. I knew well how lucky I was. I should feel greater sorrow for those without such a life. Damn Glember, I thought. Damn Glember. I heard it again. It was not the wind. The sound was exactly as it was before. I couldn't have been provoked. It couldn't have been provoked or created by nature twice, I thought. I was to my feet, crouching, and crossing the room of the shanty at once. The wind was terrible this night, and I was certain I would have difficulty discerning from which direction the noise came. Glember remained asleep, perhaps dreaming of being taken to the temple on the morrow. While I entertained thoughts of my premature death, I peered out from between the shutters. I could see nothing in the thick darkness. What was I thinking? Luckily, neither candle nor flame alighted from within our dwelling. Perhaps whatever or whoever was out there knew nothing of our late taken shelter here. And then I saw their forms condense from the gloom, entering the town spaced apart and with their staves raised. The nigh wizard order. They found our trail. I had heard they would redouble their efforts each time they failed, though none had ever heard or spoke of a failure on their part. They were here for Glember, I knew. They would slay me for my knowledge of the situation alone, I guessed. Or would they? More importantly, who were they? I'd once invested trust and hope in them. Now, I doubted anything I had not seen or touched or breathed myself. I realized I didn't trust them at all. I was certain their order existed for their own sake alone. Perhaps it was like any family of animals, yet I thought, disguised within our ranks, that they were above animals. I had guessed wrong. I began to realize they had features not like other men, not like other gargles, but something apart, something that fed off both. And I was afraid. I needed a weapon, I knew, and fast. I was probably going to die. And what of Glember? What love held the nigh wizard order for anything immaterial? What claim held they to diversity, to love? The exploitation and eradication of both man and gargle was an obvious goal of theirs. I found a poker. I wanted to laugh, and would have, had the situation not been so dire. The coals of rebellion have been stoked by far lesser weapons than a poker, I imagined, yet they were not often won with such. Still, it was all I could find. It would have to do. I backed into a corner between two windows and waited. Should a head poke through or peer within, held I the courage or will to strike it? I heard footfalls growing ever closer and closer, despite the winds. One of them was nearing this dwelling. I turned my head toward the shuttered window. The sounds of footfalls ended just outside. Were the winds not persistent? I was certain I could hear the wizard breathing just outside the window. And then there came a tremendous roar. The footfalls that once closed in on me retracted and fled from the shanty. Lights began to flash outside, and snarling echoed through the winds. I rushed to Glember's side and tried to wake him, though I don't know why. Even had I succeeded in waking him, for I did not, he held not the strength to sit up and defend with me. No, he remained motionless, oblivious the imminent danger. Perhaps he was the luckier. Suddenly, the havoc outside the window began to grow closer once more. Streams of light were thrown through every crack in the abode, and I was nearly blinded for it. A crash erupted, and the boards of the structure crumpled inward. There was a moan and the shifting of planks of wood, and, as my vision returned, I saw the silhouette of a man seated in the debris, attempting to regain his wits and feet. I backed away silently, something well masked by the various noises outside the building. The man, wearing a robe known the wizards of Nye, finally stood, although his back was to me. He began chanting softly, and I knew, were he to turn toward me, he would easily spy me through the darkness for the blinking of the bright spells and magic outside, not to mention the man-sized hole recently delivered to the cottage. Suddenly, the wizard stopped mid-chant and dove to the side. A bolt of searing energy slammed against the cottage, tearing free the corner of the dwelling. The roof of the structure fell inward, only to stop halfway along its descent. Dust billowed around the destruction, and, on instinct, I grabbed Glember by the shoulders and dragged him from the bed. Despite the thump as he struck the boards of the floor, none seemed to take notice as parts of the roof were still toppling free and coming to stillness. Still, a great part of the structure now lay in shambles, and one could easily see within. Shadows were moving all around, revealed by gaps in the light streaming through the cracks of the broken building. We would be spotted soon. Whatever battle ensued outside was happening beside and against the cottage. I decided it best to drag Glember out of the building through the back in the hopes of finding refuge elsewhere. The roof collapsed a little more just as I pulled Glember through the back doorway. A gated garden lay just behind the building, and brambleweeds and vines had grown up and over this. It would offer, I hoped, enough cover as I fled, dragging Glember toward the next cottage a short distance away, and despite the thick darkness of the night, we were plainly visible had eyes turned our direction. Shards of light and debris pelted the earth all around us as the battle ensued. Screams and snarls, loud enough to make my skin tingle and tighten, were thrown about the night, and my heart pounded heavily. Several times I fell to the earth, hearing voices that sounded to be drawing nearer, or when the light was so bright our movement could easily be discovered, and yet we made it to the nearby cottage. I kicked at the door, following a ruckus from behind, and yanked Glember inward so forcefully he skidded across the room a few steps worth before he came to a halt. I bolted the door and glanced around. I needed a place to hide Glember. I scoured the dwelling and found little. It was not partitioned like most of the dwellings I'd entered in. Rather, it was open and concealed little. I decided to check on the battle raging outside, perhaps try to discern what was transpiring, and so I crept toward the door and cracked it open, for the dwelling had no shuttered viewways. Peeking out into the distance, I saw two wizards standing side by side. They were chanting and sending great orbs of light into the distance. I opened the door a little wider to get a better glimpse of who they were attacking. I could hardly believe what my eyes beheld. The creature looked like the fabled lions we heard stories about as children, and yet it was perhaps thrice the size, and with a shimmering metallic glint to its coat. It roared and clawed at a figure on the ground before it, another of the wizards of Nye, in his last moments of life. Then a second of the great creatures came into view to stand beside the first. The two were accepting painful magical assaults from the remaining two wizards of Nye. Parts of the fallen wizard then began to dismantle as the wizards were quartered between the two great beasts. And with this done, the creatures charged the two remaining wizards. They took refuge in the dwelling I had late escaped, to no avail. The beasts batted at boards and rock, sending its fragments unto the night winds. The two emerged from the rear of the building as I had only moments ago, just as the building collapsed in on itself, and to my horror, I realized the wizards of Nye were heading toward me, directly toward the door I had edged open for a view. I slammed the door shut and bolted it once more, backing away from it. I knew I needed to do something, but my mind suddenly refused to consult its resources of logic and survival. I was simply confounded with dread, and I could only back away slowly. There came a thundering boom, and the door left its hinges, whirling through the air toward me in at least 3 pieces. I threw my arm up to ward the blow, but accepted it with the magnificent force nonetheless. I was thrown backward through the air and landed on the floor not far from Glember. I tried to sit up, but became dizzy. The world was spinning, and I could only see a blurry view of the wizards charging toward me with the great beasts closing in on them from behind, and then all went very dark. Day 56. I will tell you now of the Eterlions, for among my people there has long been passed a legend of these two creatures. This is how I remember it. Long before man was a dominant race in the realm, there were roaming the lands creatures of great power of magic and mind. Two such creatures, having become discontent with the battles raging across the realms, found some consolation in the company of each other, and began to pierce the nature of time through altruistic action. So close they grew to time that he became intrigued and challenged them. It is said these creatures put up quite a battle and nearly slew time, yet they stopped short. guessing they too would die if time was delivered a fatal strike. Having earned the respect of time, the two creatures were bestowed with the ability to control their age, something midway between the worldly and the boundless. And it was as much to remind the world through their existence that the individual, battling for the self, could never come close to the plateau of the eternal, for such would not be accomplished through preservation of the self, but rather could only be attained by overcoming the self and leaving selfishness behind, for only the altruistic leave the realm of the self, touch awareness and peace, and are no longer bound by mortality. Rewarded so by time, one of these creatures would slowly grow old while the other grew younger, yet when they touched, it would reverse, such that the younger would age and the elder would be drawn toward youth once more. And this way, as long as they stayed together, they would walk through time unscathed by age, aware and knowing the nature of connectedness, that to be altruistic is to be timeless. For this reason, their bond together grew ever more and became fiercely guarding of each other. They became known as the Eterlions, the lovers, the twins of peace. I remember hearing the tales as a child, and whether you take the tale to heart or not, whether you believe the tale or not, I remember being inspired by them, creatures that loved so greatly they became immortal as I understood it then. I was told they could never die, but one of them died. What had drawn them near? When I awoke, the wizards lay ruined by their own demise, and one of the Eterlions, as I suspected them to be, lay dead. The other lay with its head resting atop the other, resonating with a painful whine. What had happened? Had I witnessed the ultimate battle between love and hate? Glember shifted. I knelt beside him and found he'd been bludgeoned in the wreckage of the previous night's catastrophe. He was covered in blood. One side of his chest no longer rose in rhythm with his breathing. He was cold to the touch, so cold. I had only fragments of the previous night. One of the wizards was shaking his head as the last of his life slipped away. He was screaming at me, "We've slain all but one, fool. You cannot undo the fall of the gargle. You will never reach the temple, and none will believe your tale." He was laughing as he died, his staff raised and prepared to come down upon me. The remaining Eterlion batted him to the side with a powerful swipe. The staff and the life of the wizard knocked aside with the blow. Now, Glember was whispering, "Take me to the temple, human." He'd been healing, albeit slowly. Now, he looked beyond hope. Truly, I don't know how he was still alive, how he yet breathed. Yet, as I tried to move him, his wounds broke open anew and began to bleed. To move him now was to take his life. I could not move him, yet I doubted he had another day. I decided I would wait. I would let the wounds clot. I would bind them and allow them to dry. On the morrow, I would take him to the temple. I would take him dead or alive, or in the throes of that brink between. I promised Glember this, and I bound his wounds. And all the while, the remaining Eterlion cried, its head still atop its lifeless companion. Chapter 20. The Temple of the Eight Walls. Day 57. The morning came, yet it would not come for me as it would for the complacent, nor could I wake with her as I often had, for I had slept little. My mind would not allow it. I looked down upon Glember, the 3 fingers of his claws poking through the tattered gloves he wore. Was Glember the last gargle? I looked up at the seemingly uncaring skies and wondered how such a thing could come to pass. Where was the grace, the compassion I once imagined drifting among the clouds? Perhaps it never was there. Perhaps I'd only imagined it. Perhaps, the truth is, the responsibility of heaven rests on us, and we've not the courage to confront this, allowing hell's a dominion over our minds and across our valleys, into our homes and our hearts. Perhaps it is our charge to face and stop this. Perhaps I only dreamed up my original fantasies because such a grand idea courted my cowardice. Would I be held accountable now? Would I be held accountable for my thoughts? No, certainly not. I cannot help these, yet my heart would hold me accountable if I did nothing. Why had he dragged me out here? Why had he saved me, only to kill me himself? Was he truly this monster, what I imagined as a child looking at the red claw scratched on the wall of Rockshade Cave? My people, believing the lie, would condemn me for helping the Gargle. I am certain of this. They were told the Gargles were but terrors, and they believed this to be so. How many other populations were tricked as genocides were woven through time by the devices of the Nigh Wizard Order? And what of the laws of such people if I saved him, if I broke their laws? Surely the laws of my society, the mere whims of the Nigh Wizard Order, said nothing of Glember's saving me. And so what place held these creeds now? I was beginning to see things far differently than I once had. Indeed, I was beginning to see, to awaken. Regardless of my former delusions, I now know this to be true, that we owe no allegiance whatsoever to any law or government, to any empire, geographic area or state, to any faction, ordinance, tenet, or group of any kind. Rather, we owe allegiance to those we inhabit the world with, to those gone and those to be, for they are our true brothers and sisters. Allegiance we owe only to those who may live and bleed, suffer and love. And evil is allegiance to anything else. Only fools and cowards worship that which serves the self, and only those who stand instead for everyone stand for peace. Let the others work for the hells in their delusional lethargy. I decided who I was not that day. I was not a coward. I lifted Glember from the broken boards, lay him across my shoulder, for if I did not, who would? Let the laws crumble, let the heavens fall, let my back break and my feet bleed. There remained breath in my lungs and the last gargle on my back, and I began to climb the path that led to the Temple of the Eight Walls. I became conscious I was shaking, that I cursed the wizards and mocked the gods I once created with every step, and if my fate awaited in the temple, so be it. I say there is no shame in death, but infinite shame in life wasted, and if death claim me, it would take me a lover. This concludes part 15 of 17 of Glember, The Tale of a Monster. You're listening to the first book of the Meristherian Trilogy. Please subscribe if you like the content, where you'll have access to additional books. Feel free to support this site by telling others about it. Some books are free to listen to, as you know, and everyone's welcome here. Leave a friendly comment or question if you like, and I'll try to keep up with these as regularly as I can. Again, this is AK. Thanks for listening, friends, and see you next time.